Mom laughed in front of the whole family. How does it feel to be useless, son? I looked at her calmly and said, Feels great since I just stopped paying your rent. Her smile vanished. My dad froze, then shouted, What rent? Why? That was the scene playing on a loop in my head. I sat in my parked car outside the Italian restaurant, staring at the glowing entrance. The engine ticked as it cooled, counting down the seconds until I had to walk through those doors. My hands were shaking. Not a little tremor, but a violent vibration that made it hard to grip the steering wheel. I was 32 years old, a data analyst, who managed massive corporate budgets. Yet I was terrified of a 60-year-old woman who could barely operate a smartphone. On the passenger seat lay a thick manila envelope. It looked innocent enough, just a packet of papers you might carry to a tax audit. But inside, it held the ammunition for a war I had been avoiding for 3 years. It contained highlighted bank statements. It held screenshots of text messages where she pivoted from cruelty to desperation in the span of 3 minutes. It held a lease agreement with my signature on the bottom line, guaranteeing an apartment I did not live in. It was a physical manifest of my own stupidity and my mother's manipulation. I wiped a bead of sweat from my temple. My body was screaming at me to start the car and drive away. That was the instinct I had followed my entire adult life. Keep the peace. Swallow the insult. Write the check. But I could not write any more checks. I pulled my phone from my pocket and unlocked the banking app. The Face ID recognized me, even with the fear in my eyes. The screen loaded, displaying my checking account. The number was stark and unforgiving. $0.00. The balance was not low. It was empty. I had moved every cent to a new account yesterday, ensuring the automatic rent payment would finally bounce. I had no emergency fund. I had no savings. I had nothing left to give, which meant I finally had nothing left to lose. I looked back at the envelope. For years, I had treated Diane not like a mother, but like a volatile investment. I had to keep funding to prevent a crash. I had protected my father from the truth. I had protected her reputation. I had protected the fragile illusion of our happy family. Now, looking at the zeros on my screen, I realized I had bankrupted my own life to buy stock in a fraud. Through the restaurant window, I saw her. She was already seated at the head of the table, gesturing wildly with a wine glass, commanding the attention of my aunts and cousins. She looked powerful. She looked untouchable. She had no idea that her safety net was currently sitting in a dark parking lot, hyperventilating. I turned off the phone and shoved it into my pocket. The fear was still there, churning in my stomach like acid, but something else was rising to meet it. It was a cold gray resolve. I was done drowning to keep her dry. I reached over and grabbed the envelope. The paper felt rough against my damp palm. Tonight, the secret dies. Tonight, the ledger gets balanced. I opened the car door, planted my feet on the pavement, and started walking toward the light. As I reached for the brass handle of the restaurant door, the noise of the dining room washed over me, dragging my mind back to the quiet desperation where this all began. It was exactly 3 years ago, in a room that felt more like a storage unit than a home. I was 29 and freshly divorced, sitting on a floor cluttered with half-packed boxes that still smelled like the house I had lost. I felt like a failure in every direction. My marriage had collapsed, my finances were decimated by legal fees, and my confidence was non-existent. Then the phone rang. It was my mother, but the sound coming from the speaker was not a greeting. It was a jagged, terrified sob that made my stomach drop. "They are raising the rent," she had cried. her voice cracking with theatrical despair. Your father refuses to help. He says I need to learn a lesson. He says I should just figure it out. He does not care if I end up on the street, Brad. He really does not care. I remember staring at the water stains on the ceiling of my new studio apartment, feeling the weight of her panic pressing down on my own. I was barely keeping my head above water, but she was drowning. The narrative she spun was simple and devastating. My father was the callous villain, hoarding his money and punishing her for her struggles. She was the fragile victim, teetering on the edge of homelessness. And I was the only one who could save her. I asked her how much she needed. Just for this month, she had promised. Just until I get back on my feet. I cannot let the neighbors see an eviction notice. You know how humiliating that would be. I transferred the money. $1,200. It was a significant portion of my remaining paycheck, but the effect was instantaneous. Her crying stopped. The panic vanished, replaced by a warm, cooing tone that I had been starving for since my wife moved out. I knew I could count on you, she had said softly. You have always had such a good heart. You are the only one who truly understands me. You are a good son, Brad. Better than your father ever was. That praise was the hook. I swallowed it whole. For a few days I felt useful again. I felt capable. I was the protector. But the month passed quickly, and the crisis did not end. The next call was about the electric bill. The one after that was about car repairs. Then it was the rent again, because her hours had been cut, or her back was hurting, or the world was simply unfair. The temporary loan became a monthly subscription to her affection. I quickly learned the rules of this new dynamic. As long as the transfer went through, I was the golden child. She would text me sweet messages, call me just to chat, and tell our relatives how successful I was. But the moment I hesitated, the moment I mentioned my own tight budget, the warmth evaporated. Her voice would change instantly, sharpening into a weapon. After everything I sacrificed for you, she would snap. I gave up my life to raise you. And you cannot help your mother with a few $100s. It is no wonder your marriage failed, Brad. You only think about yourself. You are just like your father. Cold. Selfish. Those words were precision engineered to destroy me. She knew exactly where my wounds were, and she poked them with a hot iron whenever I tried to set a boundary. I was terrified of proving her right. I was terrified that maybe I was selfish, that maybe I was the problem. So I paid. I paid to stop the insults. I paid to prove I was not my father. I paid to avoid the crushing guilt that she shoveled onto my shoulders every time she sighed into the phone. The secrecy was the mortar that held this architecture of guilt together. Do not tell your father, she would whisper conspiratorially. You know how he gets. He would just make a scene. He would turn everyone against us. This is our secret, Brad. Just between us. I believed her. I thought I was protecting her from his anger. In reality, I was protecting her lies from his logic. I was isolating myself, cutting off the one person who might have stopped the bleeding because she had convinced me he was the enemy. Standing in the entryway of the restaurant, watching the waiters weave between tables with trays of pasta and wine, I realized that for 3 years, I had not been paying for her rent. I had been paying a ransom. I was a hostage who funded his own captivity, terrified that if I stopped paying, she would tell the world I was the monster she claimed I was. But the anger I felt now was new. It was not the soft, bruising sadness of the divorce. It was hard and sharp. The spark that had finally lit that anger had happened only 4 weeks ago, on the side of a highway with smoke pouring from my engine. That was the moment the illusion finally shattered. That was the moment I stopped being a son and started being an accountant. The transition from obedient son to cold prosecutor began on the shoulder of a highway 4 weeks ago. Smoke was billowing from the engine block of my sedan, drifting across the lanes of rush-hour traffic like a signal fire for my own incompetence. I stood on the asphalt, staring at the steam hissing from the radiator, knowing exactly what a tow truck and a transmission repair would cost. I checked my bank balance again, hoping for a miracle, but the numbers had not changed. I had $12 to my name. I had $12 because at 7 that morning, I had transferred $1,200 to my mother. It was the first of the month, and her rent was due. I had prioritized her housing over my own emergency fund, a choice I had made 36 times in a row. I had no choice. I dialed her number. She answered on the second ring, her voice light and airy. "Hello, darling. Did you get my text about the grandkids?" "Mom," I said, cutting her off. "I am in trouble. My car died on the highway. I am stranded." "Oh no," she said. "That sounds stressful." "It is," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "I need a tow, and the shop says the repair is going to be expensive. I have zero cash flow right now because of the transfer I sent you this morning. I need you to send $500 back. Just for a few days. Just until I get paid on Friday." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. It stretched for 5 seconds, then 10. When she finally spoke, the warmth was gone. The airy tone had been replaced by a flat, disappointed coldness. "Brad, you know I cannot do that," she said. "That money is already allocated. The landlord has it." "Mom, please," I begged. "I am stuck on the side of the road. I literally cannot get home." She sighed, a sound of profound irritation. "I do not understand how you live like this, Brad. You make good money. Why do you never have savings? You are 32 years old. You should not be calling your mother for handouts." The words hit me like a physical slap. I stood there, watching cars blur past me, unable to process the sheer magnitude of the hypocrisy. I was not asking for a handout. I was asking for a fraction of my own money back. I was asking for a life raft from the person who had been drowning me. "It is not a handout," I said, my voice trembling. "It is the money I just gave you. If you managed your money better, you would not be in this situation," she snapped. "Maybe, if you were just a little more of a man, you could figure this out without crying to me. You are so dramatic, just like your father." "Figure it out, Brad." The line went dead. She hung up. I stared at the black screen of my phone. I did not call her back. I did not scream. Something inside my chest, a tight knot of anxiety that had been there for 3 years, suddenly unspooled. It did not dissolve into relief. It hardened. It calcified into something freezing and sharp. She did not care about me. That was the revelation. It was simple, brutal, and undeniable. She did not love me. She loved the utility I provided. I was an appliance to her. And when an appliance breaks, you do not comfort it. You kick it. I eventually got a truck by maxing out an emergency credit card I had sworn never to touch. I got home to my silent apartment. The smell of burnt transmission. Fluid still clinging to my clothes. I did not turn on the lights. I walked straight to my desk and opened my laptop. I did not cry. I did not pace the floor wondering what I had done wrong. Instead, I opened a new spreadsheet. I logged into my bank account and went to the search history. I filtered by transfers to Diane. The list populated the screen, scroll after scroll of red numbers. I started typing. Date, amount, reason given, actual outcome, January 4th, $1,200. Rent. February 3rd, $1,200. Rent. March 15th, $300. Electric bill emergency. I type for hours. I cross-reference her texts with the transfers. I found the dates where she claimed she was broke. Then looked at her social media posts from the same week, showing off new shoes or expensive dinners. The picture that emerged was not one of a struggling woman. It was a picture of a parasite. The sadness was gone completely now. In its place was the cold, clinical anger of an auditor finding fraud in the ledger. I was going to document every cent. I was going to build a case so watertight that not even her tears could slip through the cracks. I typed until my fingers cramped, fueled by a singular, terrifying purpose. I needed help to finish this, though. I needed someone who could look at this mess and tell me how to weaponize it. I picked up my phone and texted the one person who hated her almost as much as I was starting to. Leo, we need to talk. The spreadsheet was the first step. But spreadsheets do not win arguments with narcissists. I needed a strategy, so I took my box of evidence to the dimmest, loudest dive bar in the city to meet Leo. Leo was my best friend since college. A corporate lawyer who billed $500 an hour to destroy people in boardrooms. He was aggressive, cynical, and had been telling me to cut my mother off since the day I got divorced. When I slid the box across the sticky table, he didn't even order a drink. He just started reading. He flipped through the stack of printed bank statements, his eyebrows climbing higher with every page. He stopped at the summary sheet I had compiled the night before. $52,000, Leo said, his voice flat. You have given her $52,000 in 3 years, Brad. That is a down payment on a house. That is your retirement fund. Hearing the number out loud made me nauseous. It sounded criminal. She is going to destroy you, Leo said, looking up. If you stop paying, she will not just be mad. She will go nuclear. She will tell everyone you abandoned her. She will tell your dad you are on drugs or gambling. She will rewrite history before you can even open your mouth. I know, I said. That is why I am here. I do not just want to stop paying. I want to stop her from lying. Then you need a war room, Leo said. He pulled a pen from his jacket pocket and grabbed a stack of bar napkins. For the next 2 hours we did not drink. We worked. Leo treated my family drama like a hostile takeover defense. He organized the evidence into 3 categories. The financials, which were the bank transfers. The communication, which were the screenshots of her guilt, tripping texts. And the smoking gun, which was the lease agreement I had found in her email, proving the rent was $300 less than she had been charging me. She is skimming off the top, Leo muttered, circling the figure on the napkin. Slept. She is charging you a management fee for the privilege of paying her bills. That is impressive, in a sick way. You need to understand the battlefield, Leo continued, tapping the table. She relies on 2 things. Your silence and your father's ignorance. She triangulates you. She tells him you are fine, and she tells you he is cruel. As long as you two don't talk, she wins. So I have to tell him, I said. No, Leo corrected. You have to show him. If you just tell him, she will cry and say you are jealous or crazy. You need undeniable proof. You need to drop a bomb that is so heavy she cannot lift it off her chest. He reached for my phone. Unlock it, he said. I hesitated, then handed it over. Leo opened my messaging app and created a new group chat. He added my father, my Aunt Sarah, my 2 cousins, and my grandmother. He did not send anything. He just drafted the message. Attached was a folder Leo helped me compile on his laptop. It contained the audio files of her voicemails. The nasty ones she left when I didn't pick up fast enough. It contained the PDF of the spreadsheet. It contained the photos of the receipts. "We are calling this the nuclear option," Leo said, handing the phone back. "You do not send this unless you have to. But you need to know it is there. If she tries to gaslight the room, if she tries to turn the family against you, you hit send. You burn the bridge while she is still standing on it." I looked at the screen. The cursor blinked next to the send button. It felt dangerous, like holding a loaded gun in a crowded room. "Are you sure about this?" I asked. Leo looked me in the eye. "She stole 50 grand from you, Brad. She called you useless while spending your money. She is not your mother right now. She is a liability. You need to be ruthless. Can you do that?" I thought about the cold highway. I thought about the way she hung up on me. "Yes," I said. "Good," Leo said. "Because you are going to need that anger. When you walk into that dinner, do not drink. Do not get emotional. Wait for her to lie. Let her dig the hole deep. And when she is standing at the bottom, you drop the dirt." I left the bar with the box under my arm and the draft saved on my phone. The plan was set. The evidence was organized. But as I drove home, the adrenaline faded, replaced by a sick, heavy dread. The strategy was perfect on paper. But paper doesn't scream at you. Paper doesn't have your mother's face. I pulled into my driveway and looked at the notification on my dashboard. Tomorrow night. Family dinner at Sal's. 7 p.m. I was ready to go to war. I just hoped I wouldn't freeze when the shooting started. Armed with Leo's strategy and a year's worth of suppressed rage, I walked into the restaurant. The air inside was thick with the smell of garlic and expensive perfume. My family occupied a long table in the center of the room, a loud island of laughter in a sea of quiet diners. Diane was already holding court at the head of the table. She wore a new silk blouse that I knew cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Her hands fluttered as she told a story, her gold bracelets clinking together like chimes. Everyone was leaning in, captivated by her performance. To them, she was the vibrant, resilient matriarch who had overcome so much. To me, she looked like a predator in plumage. My father, Mark, sat at the opposite end. He was eating a breadstick with mechanical precision. His eyes focused on his plate. He looked tired. His suit was 10 years old, the fabric shining at the elbows. He was the only one not laughing at her jokes, but his silence wasn't rebellious. It was resigned. I took the empty seat next to my dad. I placed my bag between my feet, feeling the hard edge of the envelope press against my ankle. "Well, look who finally decided to join us," Diane announced, her voice pitching up so the entire table could hear. "The busy man. Too important for his family, I suppose." "I'm on time, Mom," I said quietly. "It's 7 o'clock. She waved a dismissive hand. "You know what I mean. You are always so distant lately. It is like pulling teeth to get a text back." I didn't answer. I just unfolded my napkin and placed it on my lap. My silence seemed to irritate her. She thrived on the back and forth, the little bickering matches where she could play the victim. When I didn't engage, she had to work harder. She turned her attention to my appearance. "You look tired, Brad. And that shirt. Is that the one I told you to throw away 3 years ago? It makes you look washed out. No wonder you are still single. You really need to put yourself out there more." A few cousins chuckled nervously. My dad kept chewing his breadstick. "I am fine, Mom," I said, keeping my voice neutral. She sighed dramatically, looking around the table for support. "See, this is what I deal with. I try to help him, give him a little advice, and he shuts down. He has been like this since the divorce. So sensitive. The mention of the divorce was a calculated strike. She knew it was my sore spot. The one place where I felt genuinely broken. Usually, this was the part where I would snap back, defending myself, which would allow her to gasp and say I was being aggressive. Then I would apologize, and the cycle would reset. But tonight I didn't snap. I watched her. I observed the way her eyes darted around the table to check if people were watching. I noticed how she took a sip of wine every time she told a lie, masking the pause. I was not a son being scolded. I was a scientist studying a specimen. "Are you even listening to me?" she asked, her smile tightening. "Yes," I said. "I hear you perfectly." Her eyes narrowed. She sensed the shift. My lack of reaction was robbing her of the emotional fuel she needed. She decided to escalate. She needed a reaction, any reaction, to prove she was still in control. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the tablecloth. "You know, I was talking to Aunt Sarah the other day. She says her son just bought a beautiful house. A 3-bedroom with a pool. He is doing so well." "That is great for him," I said. "It is," she agreed sweetly. "It is amazing what you can accomplish when you have your priorities straight. When you are not so reckless with your life. I just worry about you, Brad. I worry you are never going to build anything real. You seem so content to just drift." The table went quiet. The insult was blatant. She was calling me a failure in front of 20 people. My dad finally looked up, a frown creasing his forehead, but he didn't speak. He never spoke. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my hands remained steady on the table. She was baiting the trap. She wanted me to explode. She wanted the angry, unstable son so she could be the long-suffering mother. I took a slow sip of water. I did not drift, I thought. I drowned so you could float. But I stayed silent. I let the insult hang in the air, festering. I let everyone at the table sit in the discomfort of her cruelty. Diane's smile faltered for a second. The silence was not working in her favor. She looked around, realizing she had pushed the room into awkwardness, and her instinct to correct it kicked in. But instead of backing down, she doubled down. She needed to win the room back. And the only way she knew how was to make me small. She let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "Oh, don't look so serious, everyone. I am just teasing him. He knows I love him. But honestly, Brad, sometimes I wonder if you would survive a week in the real world without me guiding you." She raised her wine glass, her eyes locking onto mine with a challenge. She was winding up for the knockout punch, oblivious to the fact that she was standing on a trapdoor. I moved my hand under the table and gripped the envelope. "Go ahead," I thought. "Say it." She took a breath, her lips curling into a smirk that I had seen 1,000 times before. She was about to say the thing that couldn't be unsaid. Diane beamed at the table, basking in the silence she had created. She took a long, slow sip of her wine, savoring the taste of her own cruelty. And then she delivered the line she had been polishing all night. Mom laughed in front of the whole family. "How does it feel to be useless, son?" she asked, her voice carrying over the clatter of silverware. I looked at her calmly and said, "Feels great since I just stopped paying your rent." Her smile vanished. The glass hotted halfway to the table. The air in the room seemed to be sucked out through a vent, leaving a vacuum of absolute, ringing silence. My dad froze, his fork hovering inches from his mouth. He looked at me, then at her, his brain trying to bridge the gap between the reality he knew and the words I had just spoken. Then he shouted, "What rent? Why?" The volume of his voice made the cousins jump. Diane recovered first, her survival instincts kicking in. She waved a hand dismissively, though I noticed her fingers were trembling. "Oh, stop it, Mark," she said, forcing a laugh that sounded like glass breaking. "You know Brad. He is joking. He has such a dry sense of humor. He is just being sensitive about what I said." "I am not joking," I said. My voice was steady, void of the tremor that had been there for years. I reached under the table and pulled out the heavy manila envelope. I did not slam it down. I placed it gently in the center of the tablecloth, right between the centerpiece and the bread basket. It landed with a dull, authoritative thud. Diane's eyes locked onto the packet. She knew exactly what was inside. Her face drained of color, leaving her rouge standing out like war paint. "Brad, don't be ridiculous," she hissed, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Put that away. We are having a family dinner." I ignored her. I turned my body toward my father. I looked him directly in the eye, seeing the confusion and the dawning horror in his expression. "For 3 years, Dad," I said. "Since the month after my divorce, I have been paying the rent on the apartment. I have paid the electric bill. I have paid the internet. I paid for the transmission repair on her car last November." Mark looked at Diane. "Is this true?" he asked. His voice wasn't loud anymore. It was low and rough. "You told me you were managing. You told me your job gave you a raise." "She lied," I said, cutting off Diane's intake of breath. "She didn't get a raise. She called me crying. She said you didn't care if she ended up on the street. She said I was the only one who could save her." Diane slammed her hand on the table. "That is enough!" she shrieked. "You are twisting everything. I was struggling, Mark. I didn't want to worry you. I asked our son for a little help, because that is what family does." "A little help," I repeated. I reached into the envelope and pulled out the stack of papers Leo and I had stapled together. I slid them across the tablecloth toward my father. "Look at the total, Dad," I said. "The bottom of page 1. Mark picked up the papers. His hands were shaking, causing the pages to rattle. He adjusted his glasses and stared at the figure I had highlighted in neon yellow. $52,000, he read. The number hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. He looked up at me. "You gave her $52,000. I nodded. "That is my savings. That is my retirement. That is why I drive a car that breaks down. That is why I live in a studio. Because every time I tried to save $1, she had a crisis that cost exactly what I had in my account." Diane stood up, her chair scraping violently against the floor. "This is humiliating," she spat. "You are doing this on purpose to hurt me. You are bitter because your wife left you. And now you want to destroy me too." I did not flinch at the mention of my ex-wife. It didn't hurt anymore. The truth was a shield that deflected everything. "I am not done," I said. I pointed to the third page in my father's hand. "Dad, look at the lease agreement. The one attached to the back." Mark flipped the pages. He stared at the document. "Read the monthly rent," I said. $900, he said softly. "Now look at the monthly transfer I set up," I said. $1,200, he read. He stopped. He looked at the paper, then at Diane, then back at the paper. The math was simple, but the implication was devastating. "She charged me a markup," I said, letting the cold facts settle over the room. "She was not just desperate, Dad. She was scalping me. She charged me a $300 management fee every single month for the privilege of paying her bills. She was making a profit on my guilt." The cousins were staring with their mouths open. My Aunt Sarah was watching Diane with a look of pure disgust. Diane's face twisted. She looked cornered, her eyes darting around the room, looking for an ally. Finding none, she switched tactics instantly. She slumped her shoulders, her eyes filling with instant, practiced tears. I did it for the house, she sobbed, pressing a napkin to her eyes. I needed money for groceries, for things Mark wouldn't buy. I was trying to make a nice home for us. I didn't want to be a burden. You didn't want to be a burden, Mark asked. His voice was rising again, cracking with betrayal. So you made our son your bank account. You let him think I was the villain. You were difficult, she cried. You are tight with money. I had to protect myself. You told me he didn't care. I said to her, keeping the pressure on. You told me he said I should figure it out. Did he ever say that, Mom? Or did you just need a bad guy to make sure I wrote the check? She didn't answer. She just cried harder, a loud, wailing sound that I had heard 1,000 times over the phone. Usually, that sound made my stomach turn over. Usually, it made me reach for my wallet. Tonight, it just sounded like noise. Mark stood up. He was a quiet man, a man who avoided conflict at all costs, but I saw something break in him. He looked at the woman he had been married to for 35 years, and it was like he was seeing a stranger. I asked you last month if we could afford a vacation, Mark said, his voice shaking. You said we were broke. You said we had to be careful. Meanwhile, you were taking thousands from our son. I was saving it, she lied. I was saving it for us. Then show me the account, I said. Diane froze. I leaned forward. If you were saving it for the family, pull up your banking app right now. Show us the $50,000. She stared at me with pure venom. The tears stopped instantly, replaced by a look of hatred so intense it almost made me recoil. You ungrateful little brat, she hissed. After everything I did for you, I gave you life. You took my life? I shouted back, finally letting the anger crack through my calm facade. You took my future. You took my peace. You called me useless while you were spending my money on silk shirts and wine. I pointed at the envelope. That is the truth, Mom. Those are the receipts. You can cry, you can scream, you can tell everyone I am crazy. But the numbers do not lie. You are not a victim. You are a thief. The word hung there. Thief. It stripped away the last layer of her defense. She wasn't the martyr anymore. She wasn't the struggling mother. She was a criminal in a nice blouse. Diane looked around the table, realizing she had lost the audience. The relatives were not looking at her with sympathy. They were looking at her with horror. She had been exposed, fully and completely, in the one place she felt safest. But she wasn't done. I saw her eyes harden. I saw the panic shift into something sharper, something more dangerous. She realized she couldn't charm her way out of this. So she decided to burn the building down. She straightened up, wiping her face with the back of her hand. You think you are so smart, she said, her voice dripping with acid. You think you can come here and humiliate me. You think your father is innocent in this. She turned to Mark, a cruel smile playing on her lips. Go ahead, Mark. Tell him. Tell him why I really needed the money. Tell him about your little secrets. I looked at my dad. He looked confused, genuinely baffled. I don't know what you are talking about, Diane, he said. Oh, don't play dumb, she snapped. She was flailing, grabbing at anything to distract from the evidence on the table. She was willing to destroy everyone to save herself. I watched her, realizing that Leo was right. The envelope wasn't enough. She was going to drag us all into the mud unless I ended it. I looked at my phone sitting on the table. The group chat was drafted. The nuclear option was ready. I reached for the phone. Don't you dare, she said, seeing the movement. I am not playing games anymore, Mom, I said. I didn't want to do it. I looked at her, giving her one last chance to stop, to apologize. to admit the truth. But she just sneered at me. "You are weak," she said. "Just like him." That was the end. I picked up the phone. I didn't look at her. I looked at the send button. The tension in the room was so tight, it felt like a physical weight pressing against my chest. I took a breath, and I prepared to push the button that would silence her forever. The insult was meant to be a killing blow, a final assertion of her dominance, but it landed with the hollow thud of a dud shell. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized that her anger was not strength. It was panic. She was a cornered animal snapping at the walls of a cage she had built herself. Diane turned to the rest of the table, her eyes wide and frantic. She swept her arm out, gesturing at me like I was a monster she had accidentally unleashed. "He is having a breakdown," she announced, her voice pitching into a hysterical vibrato. "Look at him. He is obsessed. He has not been right since his wife left him. He is imagining things. He is projecting his own failures onto me, because he cannot handle his own life." She looked at my cousin Mike. "Mike, you know how he gets. Tell him to stop this nonsense." Mike looked down at his plate, refusing to make eye contact. The silence of the family was deafening. They were not rallying to her defense. They were paralyzed by the sheer volume of evidence I had laid out on the tablecloth. "He is not imagining the bank statements, Diane," a voice said from the far end of the table. We all turned. Aunt Sarah was standing up. Sarah was Diane's younger sister, a woman who had spent decades biting her tongue to keep the peace. She was gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were white. "Sarah, don't you start," Diane warned, her eyes narrowing. "This does not concern you." "It concerns all of us," Sarah said, her voice shaking but clear. "Because you did the exact same thing to me when Mom died." A gasp went around the table. My grandmother estate had been a source of tension for years, but the details had always been murky. "You told me there was no money left for the funeral," Sarah continued. "You told me Mom died in debt. You made me pay for the casket, the service, the flowers. You made me take out a loan because you said the family name was at stake." "That is a lie!" Diane shrieked. "I found the accounts later, Diane," Sarah said, cutting her off. "There was insurance money. You took it. You took it and you went on a cruise. And you let me pay off that loan for 5 years. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to destroy the family. But listening to you talk to your son right now, I am done protecting you." The revelation hit the table like a physical blow. This was not just a dispute between a mother and son anymore. This was a pattern. This was pathology. Diane looked around the table, seeing her support evaporate instantly. My cousins looked horrified. My uncle was staring at Sarah with his mouth open. Diane was losing control of the narrative, and for a narcissist, that is a fate worse than death. She scrambled for a new weapon. She looked past me, scanning the restaurant, desperate for a reason to shut this down. Her eyes locked onto a booth near the window. A teenager was holding up a smartphone. The camera lens pointed directly at us. The flash of the screen betrayed that they were recording the screaming woman in the silk blouse. Diane's face drained of blood. The public humiliation terrified her more than the private betrayal. "Stop it!" she screamed at the stranger, pointing a trembling finger. "Stop filming me! You have no right!" She turned back to me, her face twisted into a mask of pure venom. "Look what you did!" she hissed. "You are making a scene? People are watching. Brad, do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? Put the phone away! Stop destroying this family for your little ego trip." I looked at her. She did not care that she had stolen my savings. She did not care that she had defrauded her sister. She only cared that a stranger might post a video of her yelling. Slept. She cared more about her reflection in the eyes of others than she cared about the reality of her own son. That was the moment the last thread of guilt snapped. I looked down at my phone. The draft was open. The file was attached. You care about them? I asked quietly. You care about the audience? I am your mother, she shouted. You owe me respect. I owe you the truth, I said. And so does Dad. I pressed a blue button. Send. For a second, nothing happened. Then, the technology caught up with the drama. A chime sounded from my father's pocket. Then a buzz from Sarah's purse. Then 2 simultaneous dings from my cousin's phones on the table. The sound rippled around the circle. A chorus of digital notifications announcing the arrival of the nuclear option. What is that? Diane asked, her voice trembling. What did you send? Check your messages, Dad, I said. Mark reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He stared at the screen. He saw the file name The Truth. He tapped it. Diane lunged across the table. Mark, don't. But he had already pressed play on the first audio file. The sound of Diane's voice, tinny but unmistakable, drifted from the small speaker. It was a voicemail she had left me 6 months ago, on a night when Mark was supposedly out of town. Brad, pick up the phone, the recording said. Her voice was slurring slightly, arrogant and cruel. I need that transfer now. Your father is whining about the budget again. God, he is such a bore. He thinks he is in charge, but I play him like a fiddle. He has no idea about the credit cards. He is pathetic, really. Just send the money so I do not have to listen to him complain. The recording ended. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. Diane stood frozen, her hand halfway extended toward the phone. She looked at Mark. She looked at the man she had mocked, the man she had lied to, the man she had called pathetic. Mark placed the phone gently on the table. He did not look at me. He did not look at the cousins. He looked only at her. His face was not red with anger. It was gray. It was the face of a man watching his house burn down and realizing he does not want to save it. You called me pathetic, he said. His voice was a whisper, but it carried to every corner of the table. Diane stammered. I was drunk. I was angry. I didn't mean it. It was just talk, Mark. You know how I get when I am stressed. You stole from our son, Mark said, listing the crimes slowly. You stole from your sister. And you laughed at me behind my back while I worked 60 hours a week to pay for this life. He stood up. He reached for his wallet, pulled out a stack of cash, and threw it on the table to cover his meal. I am done, Diane, he said. What do you mean? She asked, her voice shrinking into a terrified squeak. Where are you going? We drove here together. I am taking a cab, he said. Do not come home tonight. Mark. She screamed. You can't leave me here. Everyone is watching. I don't care, he said. He turned to me. He put a hand on my shoulder. It was a heavy, solid weight. He squeezed it once, hard. He didn't say sorry. He didn't have to. The grip said everything. It was an acknowledgement of the war I had fought alone. Then he turned and walked out of the restaurant. Sarah stood up next. She gathered her purse. I think I will leave too, she said. I have nothing left to say to you, Diane. One by one, the family stood. The cousins, the uncle, the aunt. They didn't make a scene. They just gathered their coats and drifted away from the blast zone. They couldn't look at her. The evidence was too gross, too undeniable. Diane stood alone at the head of the long table, surrounded by half-eaten pasta and the wreckage of her reputation. The waiter hovered nervously in the background, unsure if he should clear the plates. I was the last one left. I picked up my envelope. I picked up my phone. I looked at the woman who had birthed me, the woman who had consumed me for 3 decades. She looked small. She looked old. She was not a monster anymore. She was just a liar who had run out of people to lie to. She looked at me, tears streaming down her face, ruining the expensive silk. "You ruined everything," she whispered. "Are you happy now?" I looked at the empty chair where my father had sat. I looked at the exit where Sarah had vanished. I felt a profound, aching emptiness in my chest. It wasn't happiness. It was relief. It was the feeling of a tumor being cut out. It hurts, and there is blood everywhere, but at least the thing that was killing you is gone. "No, Mom," I said quietly. "I am not happy. But I am free." I turned my back on her. I walked toward the door, feeling the eyes of the strangers on my back. I pushed through the heavy brass doors and stepped out into the cool night air. The parking lot was dark and quiet. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with oxygen that finally felt like it belonged to me. But as I reached for my car keys, my phone buzzed again. It wasn't a text. It was a notification from my bank app. A scheduled auto-pay alert. Rent transfer failed. Insufficient funds. I stared at the screen. A laugh bubbled up in my throat, a dry, jagged sound. It was over. The account was empty, but so was the obligation. I unlocked my car and sat in the driver's seat. I didn't start the engine immediately. I just sat there in the silence, listening to the ringing in my ears fade away. The war was over. The enemy was defeated. Now, I just had to figure out how to live in the peace. The silence in my car that night did not last forever, but the peace it promised slowly began to take root. 3 months had passed since the dinner at the Italian restaurant, and the landscape of my life had been scorched and replanted. The fallout was exactly as messy as Leo had predicted, but the silence I had feared never came. Instead, the truth did its work. Without my monthly transfers, the illusion of Diane's lifestyle collapsed within weeks. The landlord, whom she had charmed for years, lost patience when the rent checks stopped arriving. She was evicted 30 days after the dinner. There was no family meeting to bail her out. My father refused to co-sign a new lease. Aunt Sarah refused to answer her calls. For the first time in her life, Diane had to face the mathematics of her own existence without a calculator paid for by someone else. She was currently living in a rented room in a shared house across town, far away from the neighborhood where she used to pretend to be the queen. It was a humbling drop, but it was a necessary one. My father, Mark, had moved into a small apartment of his own. We met for dinner once a week. He was going to therapy, a development that shocked me more than the eviction. He was learning how to speak up, how to unclench his jaw, and how to stop apologizing for taking up space. We didn't talk much about Diane. We talked about baseball, about work, about the future. We were getting to know each other for the first time, two survivors comparing notes after the storm. My phone vibrated. It was a text from Diane. "Can we meet? Coffee." No drama. I debated ignoring it. I had ignored her for the first 2 months, blocking the tearful voicemails and the angry texts that alternated like the tides. But I needed to close the book. I needed to see if the ghost still haunted me, or if she was just a person now. We met at a generic coffee shop on neutral ground. When I walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. The Diane I knew was armored in silk and gold, her hair sprayed into a helmet of perfection. The woman sitting at the corner table wore a simple cardigan. Her hair was pulled back in a loose bun. She looked smaller. She looked her age. I sat down opposite her. I did not buy her a coffee. She had a cup of tea in front of her that she had paid for herself. "You look good, Brad," she said. Her voice was tentative, stripped of the theatrical vibrato. "I am doing okay," I said. She nodded, looking down at her hands. "I wanted to tell you that I am seeing a counselor. Your father insisted on it as a condition for him even talking to me on the phone." "That is good," I said. "The counselor made me write down a budget," she continued, tracing the rim of her cup. It was humiliating. I realized I was living like I had 3 incomes. Yours, mine, and whatever I could squeeze out of Mark. I didn't even know how much a gallon of milk cost. I just swiped the card. She looked up at me. There was no anger in her eyes, just a dull, exhausted resignation. She had no moves left. The audience was gone. The stage was dark. She had to just be Diane. I was terrified, she admitted. I thought if I wasn't the one holding the purse strings, if I wasn't the one looking perfect, you would all leave me. I thought being useless was the worst thing in the world. "You were never useless, Mom," I said gently. "You were just expensive." She let out a dry, short laugh. "That is one way to put it." I waited. I knew what usually came next. The ask. The pivot to a new crisis. But she just sighed. "I am not asking for money," she said, reading my mind. "I know that door is closed. I don't want to be enemies. I miss my son." I looked at her. I felt a twinge of the old guilt, the reflex to fix her sadness, but I didn't act on it. I let the feeling pass through me like a breeze. "We can't go back to how it was," I said firmly. "I am not your safety net anymore. I am not your retirement plan. If you want to be in my life, you have to add value to it, not subtract from it. No guilt trips. No passive-aggressive comments about my life. If you cross that line, I walk away again. And next time, I won't come back for coffee." She swallowed hard. Her eyes watered, but she nodded. "I understand," she whispered. "I accept the terms." We talked for another 10 minutes. It wasn't warm. It wasn't a movie ending where we hugged and erased the past. It was awkward and stilted, but it was real. It was a conversation between 2 adults. Not a hostage negotiation. I stood up to leave. "I have to get back to work," I said. She looked at me, and for a second, I saw the old Diane try to surface. The one who wanted to demand more time. But she pushed it down. "Okay," she said. "Thank you for coming." I walked out of the coffee shop and into the bright afternoon sun. The city moved around me, loud and indifferent. I walked to the corner and waited for the light to change. On the other side of the street, there was a kiosk selling pastries. I felt a sudden urge for something sweet, something frivolous. I walked over and ordered a large oat milk latte and a cinnamon bun. The cashier rang it up. "That will be $12, she said. I pulled out my phone. I didn't feel the familiar spike of panic. I didn't have to mentally calculate if I could afford it or if a rent transfer was pending. I tapped my card against the reader. It beeped, a cheerful, affirmative sound. While I waited for the coffee, I opened my banking app. I didn't do it out of fear. I did it for the satisfaction. The screen loaded. There were no red numbers. There were no pending transfers to Diane. There was a checking account with a healthy balance, and a savings account that was slowly, steadily growing, fed by the money that used to buy her silence. I took the hot cup from the counter. The steam rose up, smelling of cinnamon and freedom. I took a sip. It tasted like the best thing I had ever bought. I was 32 years old. And for the first time in my life, I owned every single cent of my own future.